Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome back to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Starting off our breaking news today, it appears that General Zaluzhny has declared that blood will be spilled on Russian soil, and the Ukrainians will begin to attack strategic Russian military infrastructure on a regular basis to try and level the playing field in between Ukraine and Russia. This statement was made today, just an hour ago, by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. According to Zaluzhny, he says that this is our problem, and we have to decide how to kill this enemy. In a war, you can and should kill on their territory. If our partners are afraid to use their weapons, we will kill them with ours, but only as much as is necessary. And this is according to what Zaluzhny said in a direct quote to the Washington Post, then later on taken by the Kyiv Post here, which was around an hour ago at this point. This appears to be part of a larger Ukrainian plan to try and level the playing field in between the Ukrainians and Russians and strike strategic Russian assets inside of Russian territory before they can be used in Ukraine. And it appears that those words are already being acted upon at this moment, most likely by orders of the Commander-in-Chief of the AFU, General Zaluzhny, as we saw Russian air defenses being activated in the city of Voronezh. In this short clip, we can see a Russian surface-to-air missile intercept something in the sky and explode. You can see the missile flying over the town here and exploding onto something right there, leaving a jet of shrapnel after it has exploded. The video then repeats, but this is a very interesting thing to observe. We do understand that with some Ukrainian drones, such as the Tu-141 Strych, and I'll show you one of these here, this has been used by the Ukrainians before to attack inside of Russia. In fact, you can see one of these Tu-141s right here being used by the Ukrainians. And this seems to be some kind of an attempt by the Ukrainians to use their older weaponry that can strike really far into Russia to attack Russian strategic targets in the area. These Tu-141 Striches do have the ability to be shot down, kind of like we saw what appeared to be a shoot down over the city of Voronezh by Russian air defense. And it appears that the Ukrainians are trying to attack inside of Russia, also without escalating and also without displeasing their Western allies and friends, such as the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Poland, etc. They're trying to make sure that the war isn't escalated, and the only way that the war can be escalated outside of what the Ukrainians are already doing is if they began to use Western weaponry to conduct these strikes inside of Russia. That would immediately escalate it because the Russians would have a fairly level footing to say that the West is directly involved in this war, hence the use of Western weapons, and that may then draw the West directly into the war, which is something we are trying to avoid. And it appears that the Ukrainians are trying to find any ways to work around that and strike inside of Russia with their own weapons and in the end not escalate the war. And that appears to be what we're seeing here with the statement by Zaluzhny and also the attack that happened all the way inside of Voronezh. At the same time, while the Ukrainians are attacking inside of Voronezh, many people are scared that the Russians will attempt to escalate this war by drawing the Belarusians in or attacking Ukraine through Belarus again. And that does not appear to be the case anytime in the near future, as President Zelensky came out today and said that there was no possibility and absolutely no chance of an attack coming from Belarus. According to President Zelensky, he said, quote-unquote, no threat of invasion from Belarus whatsoever. And this was said in a meeting on Friday with military leaders, according to a report given by the Ukrainian intelligence to President Zelensky. And it appears that Zelensky and the Ukrainian government is incredibly confident in the idea that the Belarusians nor the Russians will be invading from their northern border and once again trying to strike towards key cities such as the city of Kyiv, Lviv, Rivne, or Lutsk. And I would have to say that is something that is quite astute observation. We already saw that the Russians lost the Battle of Kyiv in the first month of the war. Within 30 days, the largest part of the Russian army that had invaded Ukraine had been defeated and retreated out of the area after having lost the battle. And that is something we will probably never see them repeat again, because at the moment, we see that there are no Russian forces inside of Belarus hardly at this point, most likely beyond advisory staff to the Belarusian army. And that was also made in a statement by the Ukrainian Border Guard Service today. And from what the Ukrainian Border Guard Service is saying, they're saying that the number of Russian military personnel in Belarus has greatly decreased, according to their own intelligence. At the moment, according to the State Border Guard Service, almost all Russian troops have been withdrawn from the territory of Belarus. This is a very important thing to point out. because many people have always been saying, ever since that failure of the first Battle of Kiev, that there will be a second Battle of Kiev eventually, and Russian forces are either constantly in a state of shifting into that area and preparing for that invasion, or they are going to be conducting it any minute. That's what a lot of people have been saying. And from Ukrainian intelligence, there are no Russian forces inside of Belarus any longer. There are also no indications that even President Zelensky is getting from Ukrainian intelligence that there would be an attack from Belarus. And so that appears to be entirely out of the picture at this point, and something that will never happen, at least at this point in the war. We may see that the Russians attempt that later, but at this moment, it is farther away from reality than it ever has been at any other point in the war. The absence of Russian troops is also leading the Belarusians to be quite concerned about their border security and the state of their armed forces. Russian forces have always had a somewhat significant presence inside of Belarus. We're not talking in the hundreds of thousands, but at least in the excess of a 10,000 man force being inside of Belarus at any given moment. And apparently, the complete absence of Russian forces for the most part in Belarus is starting to cause them a large amount of concern. And it's not because the Russians are just expecting the Belarusians to pick up the slack. It is once again tying directly into the terrible frontline situation we're seeing in Ukraine. Russia has dedicated every single combatant unit that they have to the front lines in Ukraine, and a lot of those have been attrited into oblivion and do not exist any longer. And so they're having to strip the Belarusians even of their Russian security forces that have been in the area to bring them to Belarus to try and carry on the fight. And that is something that the Belarusians are becoming very concerned about, and it appears that the Russians are in a very fragile state and may not be able to come to Belarus's aid in the future at any given point. And that is why it appears that Lukashenko has begged for the Wagner units to arrive inside of Belarus and to begin training the Belarusian army. And that is something we heard about today, as it appears that a picture has come out of Yevgeny Prigozhin inside of Belarus, and we can see him right here inside of a field tent, wearing nothing but briefs. Very interesting choice of underwear. And we can also see him giving a wave to the camera right here. This is most likely a picture taken in southern Belarus, although we don't know exactly where this is in Belarus. We were able to confirm that the picture was in the country, however. And that is Prigozhin joining the Wagner and training Belarusian troops. But this also comes on a contradictory statement by Prigozhin as well. He stated not too long ago that the Wagner unit would be back in Ukraine by August 5th. Meaning that they will not be in Belarus, and considering that there is no chance of an attack coming from Belarus, either by the Belarusian army, the Russian army, or the Wagner unit, they are going to be returning to Ukraine at some point. And this may be suggesting that Prigozhin is now going to be split in between two different mission objectives. One will be for the Wagner unit to carry on their combat operations inside of Ukraine once they return on August 5th, and we'll also be seeing that he may be having to split his attention in Belarus as well, as he'll be needing to be up there and helping and making sure that the Wagner unit is conducting proper training of the Belarusian army. This training is once again most likely being undertaken to get the Belarusian army up to speed. In the 31 years of Belarus's history, they have not been involved in an actual conflict beyond peacekeeping operations, and peacekeeping operations do not prepare an entire army for a conventional war, or even border raids for that matter, which may be a great concern to the Belarusians, much like we have seen with the Russians and the Russian Liberation Army and the Russian Volunteer Corps, impromptu raids of the border being made, and then these forces holding territory for as long as they possibly can. The Belarusians may be scared of the Belarusian partisans that are inside of Ukraine doing a very similar thing along their borders. And that would be a massive national embarrassment if the Belarusian army, which is 70,000 strong, would not be able to hold back that attack, or may even take incredible losses due to no practical experience and therefore a lack of training and most likely some kind of bloating, corruption, or incompetence that would be plaguing the Belarusian army. And that may be why the Wagner is there, to give them an idea of what modern combat may look like against a modern fighting force like Ukraine, or partisans that are coming from Ukraine. And we can also hear from the Belarusian Ministry of Defense, this is also something that is being corroborated beyond just a single picture. According to Fytuk's news, Wagner fighters are instructing the Belarusian Territorial Defense Forces, and that also came from the Belarusian Ministry of Defense. And so it is clear that the Belarusians are being trained by the the Wagner forces inside of Belarus, most likely to prepare for Ukrainian partisans of Belarusian origin to cross the border and to hopefully try and turn them back. the chances of that being successful are quite unlikely. One of the last postings that Wagner had before the coup began was to try and strengthen the Russian border security along the Ukrainian border. It appears that the Russian Liberation Army and Russian Volunteer Corps, also known together as the Russian Liberation Army, were not successful in stopping that incursion. The Russian Liberation Army, including the Freedom of Russia Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps, were able to hold the area around Shevakino and all the way up to Maslova Prestan, just a few miles south of Belgrade, for several weeks before they were ever pushed out or just retreated out. And we don't really know what happened to them. We don't know if they were pushed out or retreated out, but nonetheless, that could be a massive issue for Belarus, especially considering how fragile the Belarusian military and government is, as well as the Russian military and government is at this point. And it also appears that the Russian government is understanding how fragile the situation is inside of Russia as well with their own government. And it's not just a problem that the Belarusians are dealing with. Of course, the Belarusians are somewhat benefiting off of the Russians' fragility, because the Wagner has shown that the Russian government sits on a house of cards, and that house of cards could collapse at any given moment. And we can see that Putin is starting to float around the idea of replacing Prigozhin as the commander for the Wagner. According to a statement that the president of Russia made to the Kommersant newspaper that was published on Friday, today, he said that he proposed that Wagner fighters have a new commander in a senior mercenary that is now named Andrei Trushev. We don't know much about Andrei Trushev at this moment, but we believe that he is directly affiliated and operating the Wagner PMC at this moment. Putin may be attempting to start the stir that he should replace Prigozhin as the Wagner commander in an attempt to try and bring the Wagner unit back under their control, or better yet, more loyal to the Russian government. Of course, Prigozhin is really the only political entity inside of Russia that is posing a threat to Putin's power, and we saw that during that coup. That threat came very close to overthrowing the entire Russian government. During the middle of that coup, Putin came to the defense of Shoigu, and immediately afterwards, Prigozhin stated that Russia would not only be getting a new Minister of Defense, but they would be getting a new president as well, clearly showing that Prigozhin's ambitions went beyond the Ministry of Defense and went on to wiping out the entire Russian government as it existed in its modern form. And it appears that Putin is still trying to find a way to carefully step around this very serious issue for the Russian government and find a way to have Prigozhin stripped of some kind of power and have his authority diminished, so that way his political presence and political threat to the Russian government will also disappear in time with the losing of that power. But that appears to be what Putin's master plan is right now, and whether that will really work or not is yet to be seen. We don't know how loyal the Wagner is to Prigozhin anymore, considering that a lot of them seem to be disappointed in his actions and ideas that he had during the coup. And we may see that he may actually be replaced by someone else, or he may still stay in power in the Wagner PMC, and they may still remain a simmering and very serious threat to the Russian government. The Russians are, of course, trying to save face in any way they can, as their government situation is quite fragile, and they're trying to show to the Russian public in any way possible that they still hold some kind of power or some kind of authority over the situation they are in. And that brings us to the city of Smolensk, as the Russians kicked out and closed down a Polish consulate today within the city. The city of Smolensk holds a large amount of significance to the Russian public historically, as the Battle of Smolensk was one of the largest battles in the Second World War in between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, and it was given the status of a hero city after the war, and still honors itself off of that status to this day. And considering that the Polish consulate is being kicked out of that city, it may be some kind of a reference that the Russians are trying to make about the Western world being led by a bunch of Nazis, at least according to their claims, and they're trying to show some kind of a power move to the Russian public by kicking the Polish consulate out. And according to the Russian government, this is due to hostile actions that Poland has been taking against the Russian Federation. My question is if they are concerned about kicking out consulates due to hostile actions, why weren't they kicked out far earlier? Poland has been the most audible advocate for armed support of Ukraine, not just military support, but true military intervention in Ukraine out of any other NATO ally there has been. This shows that this isn't something that the Russians are just picking up on and they're wanting to kick out the Polish consulate due to something new happening. The Polish have had this hardline stance against the Russians since the very first day of the war. And I think that this shows that the Russians are once again trying to improve their image to the public inside of Russia by trying to do something that is very weak, which is kicking out a consulate. That's just a flash of a pin and a consulate can be gone. But they're trying to make it look like a power play over the West and make it look like the Russian government still is strong and can still knock around Western powers, although we know they can't even knock around a private military company that was of their own creation. And so it does appear that the Russian government is in a very fragile situation, impaired with the attacks that General Zaluzhny is now declaring will be made inside of Russia on a regular basis. That may also once again be weakening the view that the Russian public has on their government while they so desperately try and regain the initiative and regain that public image that they had before that failed coup occurred. But that is all the breaking news that we have for today. And thank every single one of y'all so much once again for watching this news. If y'all did enjoy, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. That does help us to keep these little video projects running. And I got to thank every single one of y'all so much once again for watching. We are entirely honored by y'all's viewership, and I thank y'all for finding this to be a quality source of news. And so with that, thank you all so much once again, and I will see you all in the next one.